The following content is not intended as a substitute for professional legal advice, medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your attorney, advocate, physician, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding any medical or educational concerns.
Welcome to Empower Dyslexia podcast. I'm Rachel Chambers.
And I'm Stephen Yearout.
And we're here to help you be a better informed partner in education. On this show, we discuss dyslexia and related disorders, interventions, new research, and we also interview experts in the field and then people with personal stories. Be sure to like us on Facebook.
And on YouTube, you can subscribe to us. Remember, our goal is trying to have 1,000 likes and followers on YouTube or
Yes.
on Facebook, and then subscription or subscribers on YouTube.
Yes.
By the end of May. So
By the end of May, y'all. So we
we've
have
already hit
about
100 or 500.
Yeah, 500.
So we're well on our way.
Yeah, it's exciting. Okay, so Stephen and I have had like a really busy week, right? And you had a busy weekend.
Yes. So I was asked to speak at a event in Wiley at Wiley High School from PATH. So we spoke about how to work with your district in making sure that your child gets the right intervention, make sure that all the accommodations fit properly. Basically just making sure that the parents had all the information that they need to make informed decisions and be that better partner in education, like we say all the time,
Yeah,
right?
that's great.
That was a great time. Lots of attendees, great other vendors that were there.
Yeah.
And then I spent 3 nights at Pine Cove Ranch with
Camping?
Yes, with my son's 5th grade field trip.
Wow.
So we had a good time.
How fun.
Yeah, it was good time.
I
Good
bet
times.
I bet you're a bit tired though.
I was glad to sleep in my own bed and not in a bunk bed.
Yes. I don't even know. Can you fit in a bunk bed anymore? Did you fit?
Well, we bought an air mattress.
Because aren't they
We bought a twin size air mattress thinking that it would fit in there, and my feet were like 6 inches hanging
Yeah,
off the
that's
end
what
of
I
it.
thought, 'cause
yeah,
you're a
it
big
was-
guy.
It wasn't fun.
Yeah.
So what'd you do?
Oh gosh. Well, okay, first off, I worked all weekend, but we'll move forward. On Monday, since I worked all weekend, I drove down Monday morning early. I got up at 4:30 and drove all the way down to Austin for my Special Education Continuing Advisory Committee meeting. And for y'all that don't know, that's every state has one, and the governor appoints you, or at least the governor in Texas appointed me. I don't know why. But we talk about what special education is doing, how it's doing in the state. And we try to advise the Texas Education Agency and the governor on what we think is a good idea. I don't know if we're doing that. I don't know. I've been on the committee for a year, and it's been very interesting. But I did want to share with you guys what we talked about. So Justin Porter came from the TEA and talked about how the TEA was working, how they were progressing on their strategic plan for correcting special education in Texas. He told us that there's 9 grants and 2 contracts. One of the grants is from University of Texas, and they're going to be handling, what are they handling? Parent involvement, parent engagement. And for you guys that don't know, so Texas was investigated by the federal government about 2016 because the Texas Education Agency had placed an 8.5 cap on special education, meaning that no more than 8.5% of students would be allowed special education services. So a lot of our kids slipped through the cracks and were not identified, not tested, and basically denied services. So that's why we're doing the strategic plan, is to try to correct that and be good with the government, the federal government. So he told us about these contracts, and mainly grants. Then he told us that our monitoring system that they'd been using since 2002 or maybe 2004, when No Child Left Behind was implemented, it's called the PBMAS data collection system. They're going to get rid of that or retire it, and they've made a new one that's more robust for monitoring how we're doing in special education. So here's my concern. My concern is this: if we have a great data monitoring system, then that is fantastic, right? So we can know how our kids are doing. But if the state of Texas, our Congress, doesn't fund the people to do
to house
interventions, for, let's say dyslexia intervention or speech therapy or whatever the case may be, then we're just kind of going to watch our system fail, I'm afraid. So that's my concern with that. And will you go to the next slide? Because I forgot what I was going to say. Also, Mike Meyer came, and he's from the financial area of the Texas Education Agency. So he told us about the Fifth Circuit ruling, TEA versus the U.S. Department of Education. And so they were in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals back in December. And so he totally told us basically that we lost, and Texas must return $3.3 million back to the federal government that they did.
33
What
million.
did I say?
$33.3 million.
$33.3 million that they did not. So the federal government basically gave us that money
To spend on
in
special education.
2012, and Texas didn't spend that money in 2012 on special education. And so they want their money back.
Right.
So now they're in a settlement. So they're working on that to try to recoup that money. He also told us, Mr. Meyer told us that it's going to take $54.5 million to get our special education program caught up. But that does not include all the kids that are now being identified
Right.
and placed into special education or 504. So there's a lot going on. It was. I wish I had better news about how that meeting went, but that's kind of the gist of it. And I'm very grateful that TEA came and talked to us and told us about what's going on. So what I want to express to you guys, especially the Texans out there, or anybody in the United States, actually. So Texas is in session. Our Congress is in session until Memorial Day, which is what, May 31st, the last day of May? Is that right? So if you feel strongly about this and you want our Congress to fund special education, you need to contact your Congress people, your legislators.
You really can make a difference. I know. I know.
They'll listen to you.
It seems like, hey, they're in Austin or they're in Washington. They're not going to listen to me. I'm a nobody, right? But they really do listen to you. So, the point being, if you strongly feel this way, please reach out to your state representative, your U.S. representative. Share your story. Share your concerns. Let's make sure that we get all this funded.
So then everybody will get a good education for all. So
with all that out,
okay,
let's get some good stuff
better
going
now.
here. Let's talk about
now
some
let's get lighter.
sports.
Yeah, let's talk about football. Okay. So on the show today, we have special guest Coach Jeff Jordan. He is the Director of Player Personnel from SMU. So that's Southern Methodist University, for all y'all that doesn't know what SMU is. And then we also have Coach Chuck Locke, who is my son's football coach. He's the Director of Alumni Relations at the Alumni Relations and Community Engagement for the Shelton School, which is a school for kids that have dyslexia, ADHD, and learning differences. So he is the middle school football and baseball coach.
Correct.
Yeah.
When the weather's good.
When the weather's good. So we're very happy to have y'all here today.
Thank you.
And Coach Jordan was my high school football coach.
Nice.
He actually took over the football program, I think, by sophomore year.
That was, I became defensive coordinator then, and then took over as head coach in 2001.
2001. Forgot the coach's name.
Dennis Harris.
Yes.
Yeah, Coach Harris.
He was the head coach my freshman year, and I think you took over shortly after, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, welcome to today's show. Well, let's start out with Coach Jordan. Would you just tell us a little bit about yourself, how you came to coach, where you've been, things like that?
Sure. Yeah, it was. It's a pretty short list, especially for a coach who usually moves around a lot. I was Texas high school coach 29 years. I was 28 years at Garland High School. I was a head coach from 2001 through 2015. In 2015, I had a chance to retire and go to the University of Kansas and was director of player personnel up there. David Beatty, who was the head coach up there, actually went to Garland High School, so I'd known him, and his wife was a cheerleader for us at Garland. Known both those families for 30 years and had a chance to go up there. And then last year about this time, Sonny Dykes took over at SMU, and so I had a chance to come home, and so it didn't take me very long to head back from Kansas and head back home.
That's awesome.
Fantastic. So this is home.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, good.
This is on. My wife actually stayed down here. Both our daughters are in Austin. And my wife actually stayed down there, and I got an apartment up in Kansas. And so we kind of commuted
back and forth.
Yeah, commuted back and forth, which was interesting. But when you've been married 27 years, it was good. It was fun. We had a good time, and it was almost like we were dating again. So it was a lot of fun.
That's nice. Well, that's good.
Well, you won a state championship though, right?
Yes.
99?
Yep, 99. We won state championship at Garland. Had a lot of really good kids and good players over the years. It was a lot of fun.
That's awesome.
That is fun.
Coach Locke?
Well, mine's a little different completely because I've always been in the private school sector, but I started off, I've been doing it for 33 years. I did 11 years of youth football and actually youth sports, football, basketball, baseball, anything I could do to coach. And I did 11 years as a varsity coach at Shelton. I've been there for 24 years. We started six-man football at Shelton, which was an experience. We had one kid that had ever played before, and the other 14 would stand around and wonder what he was doing. Then I did 11 years at varsity, like I said. Then we weren't teaching them that well in the varsity level at Shelton, and so I went down and I got married and was tired of spending 70 hours on a football field. And I went and I've been doing middle school for 11 years. So there's something about the special number of 11. Hope I keep going on. But most coaches either love or hate middle school. I absolutely love them. They still laugh at my jokes. Every now and then,
you are funny.
Well, every now and then you can get them to do what you want them to do, and when you can get them in a huddle to get them out of the huddle onto the field running a play, it's a golden moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
know,
You
it's
do
a
a
lot of
great
fun.
job.
Well,
I
thank
look forward to getting your emails actually. Like he'll email, the parents to say, okay, well, Junior did this and Junior did that. And, as a group email. And he's so funny. So if you, decide to change your profession and want to be a stand-up comedian, I think you might have.
I don't like working in smoky bars.
There you go. Well, there's that. There's that. Okay, so go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, you go.
I was just going to ask. Have you always worked with kids with disability? Because you work or learning differences. Because you work at Shelton, correct?
Right.
So have you always worked in that area?
29 years I have. I was actually asked by a friend of mine at church. She asked me if he'd be interested in working at a school for kids with learning differences. And actually she said disabilities. And those words get interchanged so much it's hard to keep up with. But she basically said, hey, would you be interested? And I just love coaching anybody. And I said, sure. So I went over there and it was a whole different experience. I'd seen kids with issues that I'd never seen before. And that kind of got my foot in the door at Shelton. And they hired me in '96 to come over and basically do PE and athletics. I was actually doing middle school girls volleyball. So if you can coach that, you can coach pretty much any sport in the world. And there was something about the kids that I've loved. I mean, I love working with all kids, really. I mean, it doesn't matter learning differences or not, but you find out most kids are learning different in some capacity. I mean, even your stud athletes, they may not struggle in the classroom, but they do learn differently. And at Shelton, it's a neat environment. You watch these kids go from point A to point B, and it's very rewarding to be a coach there, especially in the middle school where they're extremely squirrely, but they're a lot of fun.
They are. I don't know how you do it. I don't know how both of y'all do it. Coaching, I don't know. I'm just
So-
grateful that you do it.
I said that Coach Jordan was one of my football coaches. One of the things, especially here in Texas, back in the late '80s, no pass, no play came about. So I struggled personally because number one, I wasn't getting any intervention, didn't really understand what was going on with me as far as in the education side of it. Right, I always felt that I was a really good athlete. I never really had to, I tell my kids all the time, I never really had to play for my position.
You're just naturally
I was
gifted
naturally
in
gifted in that
football,
area,
yeah.
right? So I was always big. I was always, for alignment, I was pretty
I was
fast.
gonna say, what position did you play?
I played offensive guard, offensive tackle, defensive end. When I got to high school, I was defensive end.
Okay.
But no pass, no play was detrimental to me because as soon as that got put in place, it was a cutoff. And football was the only thing that really kept me involved in school. So once I got there, once that got put in place, I was just like, well, you've just taken away everything that I needed.
That
Right?
kept you in school,
Right.
wanting to go to school.
So I guess my question is, Coach Jordan, you can take this. How did you see that affect your athletes when you were coaching?
It made a big difference right off the bat, just because there's a lot of kids who that really gave them a reason to work in class. And maybe at that point in their life, they didn't see the value of education. They didn't see why they were having to do all that stuff. But then they knew, okay, I do like playing football or basketball or track or whatever it is. And if I don't pass, then I'm not going to be able to do that. So it gave some kids incentives to be able to pass their classes. There's some negatives about it too, because then sometimes kids would take easier classes and they didn't really challenge themselves academically. And over the years, they made some changes to it where honors classes were waived, IB classes were waived. If you did challenge yourself, you weren't punished for if you did really try and reach out and try and take a class that maybe you weren't quite ready for, but you went ahead and did it, and you did fail after they had changed that. But when it initially went in, it was a strict, hard, fast. It didn't matter whether you were taking pre-calculus IB or you were taking algebra 1B or whatever it was. If you didn't pass, you didn't play, and it was a game changer. It really made a big difference.
Yeah, I joke now about it just to make light of it, but I was a star football player for 6 weeks. I always did it there for 6 weeks. That was great. But what you don't have that issue in Shelton. You don't have no pass, no play.
Well,
do you?
we do have TAPS. We're in the high school that they do have no pass, no play, and their whole rule about it is you can't be failing 2 classes. Where at Shelton you can't be failing 1, and really what I think the difference between Shelton and a lot of other schools is that our teachers really work hard to make sure that a child, especially with dyslexia or ADD, ADHD, auditory processing, you're kind of channeled into a class that they can work with you, and they actually are trying to get you, educated to do all your stuff. So we have a lot smaller classes, which makes a huge difference. And you have teachers that are trained in special education, teachers that have a lot of experience, and they're good about making sure that, well, if this kid is struggling on week 1, week 2, week 3, we're not going to get to week 4 struggling, because we're going to try to push him into the right area. So it's a little bit different than public school. They didn't have no pass, no play when I was in school, thank goodness, because I was a sub to the sub to the sub to the third string wide receiver, so it didn't really affect me one way or the other. But I will tell you that I know a lot of coaches, public school coaches, it was tough for them, especially if you hadn't had it, and then all of a sudden you're the first coaches that have to deal with that. And so I think public school coaches have done outstanding with, it changes your whole team. You work for weeks to get a team a certain way, and then all of a sudden a 30-year team is sitting in study hall.
Well, I didn't.
Yeah.
I think back and I try to put myself back in that position, right? Now as an adult, I think back of how I have to take responsibility for my piece of it, right? But I think back and I'm like, I don't know if you remember this story or not. We were at my cousin's funeral, and I came up to you and I said, "Hey, Coach, I want to thank you and tell you I apologize to you for not being the athlete that I could be, and thanked you for never giving up on me. And one of the things, I've told you this story, I still today have nightmares, and literally nightmares, about walking through the gates at Williams Stadium and trying to find you and wanting to be back on the football team and wanting to graduate. And I wake up in a panic and sweat, and I'm just like, still as a 45-year-old man, that's something that hits me so hard, right? But I mean, there was a couple really key teachers in my life that made the difference. You were one of them. Miss Lowen, our biology teacher, was one of them. I talked about her last week. And I know that coaches know it. You know, y'all play a couple different roles. Y'all play coach, you play teacher, and for a lot of these kids, you play father. Because a lot of these kids don't have a father in their life, right? So, you know, us, kids are trying to reach out and make sure that they understand what it is that they have to do. And if the coaches, and a lot of times the coaches are trying to do the best thing for these kids, right?
I think everybody has
they have great intentions. But without those coaches like y'all and like Miss Lowen, I would have been dead or in prison. I know it. So I want to say live on air, thank you for all that you did. You may not know it, but I want to tell you, thank you so much. Will you put that picture up for me?
Thanks, Justin.
There you go.
There's our football player.
Does that bring back memories?
Oh, yeah, it does, no doubt. You know, it's so funny as you get older, in your mind, you know, I still see you as a 14, 15-year-old kid coming in from, coming in from middle school and coming up to Garland High School. Sam Houston, right? Were you a Sam Houston kid? Yeah, that's what I thought. And, but what you hit on, I mean, that, to me, that's why you get into coaching. That's why you get into education, because you want to help kids. And, that's one of the most rewarding things is, and it doesn't always take place when they're in high school. Sometimes guys will come back 10 years later and 20 years later and, and say, man, coach, I see what you were trying to do and trying to talk about. And you just, you keep working and it's always very heartwarming, and I'm proud of what you've done and what you're doing right here. Because it's a big deal and it's really important to help kids out. And you took something that could have been a real negative situation. You made it into a positive situation. And to me, that's what sports and athletics are all about.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's something that you and your coaching staff, instills, and that's really what y'all, that's both of y'all. That's what y'all instill in these kids. And like you said, you may not know it now as a child, but you're learning teamwork. You're learning how to be a leader. You're learning all of these things, skills that you're going to need later in life. And you are correct. Much later in life, you're going to look back on it and go, wow. That person touched me, touched my life in such a way. And I'm glad that I have the opportunity to tell you face to face, thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate it, Steve. It means a lot.
Well, and Coach Locke, okay, since we're just bragging, Coach Locke here, he's totally turned my kid totally around. My son. I mean, my son
We're
didn't
still
like.
working on it.
We're still working on him, and he's a tough cookie to crack. Or what is it? To crack. Tough cookie? I don't know. Anyways, but I mean, seriously, he, you know how he was or is last year. He's just really quiet and kind of withdrawn. And then football came around, and Coach Locke and the rest of the coaches on the team yelled at him. And they yelled, like, do better. And then they yelled, you did so good. And oh my gosh, that made such a difference. I mean, he went from, he just is like, I'm going to get all choked up.
Well, there's something different about, and I'm speaking from a football coach. I guess this really works from a football player. It really is any athletics that you do. You really, as an athlete, you try to do everything you can for that person that's asking you to do it. Once you have gain that person's or that coach that's over there, that coach has gained your respect. You try to do any and everything
Oh,
you
definitely.
can to make them pat you on the back
Most definitely.
and bring you up. I mean, we had a couple of coaches that screamed and yelled constantly. But, they were great coaches. Now, looking back on it, I understand what they were doing. But as a child, you're just like,
What is one of the things that you yelled? I don't know, it just cracked me up.
I don't know if you can say that on television.
I know, right? No, yes, it wasn't that bad. It was really funny though. Like one of the kids, I don't know, was maybe slow to get off the field or something like that.
That's my standard line is I'll be yelling because, middle school, we don't have the headphones. We don't have a lot of things. We don't have 50 coaches on the sidelines yelling at kids. So I was yelling at your son, I believe.
Possible.
Dash he was out on the field when he wasn't supposed to, which is kind of a common occurrence with middle school. And I was telling him, I'm hollering, Dash, and I'm pretty loud.
You are
very
loud. Yeah.
And I'm hollering,
good.
and it's taking him forever to get off the field. And I hollered at him and said, did you change your name? And he didn't get it, of course. The parents laughed. Some of my coaches
Yeah.
have heard it before, but
Well, and then you said something about having a ticket tape parade for you. We're going to have to shut the game down and have a parade for you since you got off the field so fast. I don't know what it was.
I say
It
a
was
lot of things that I
hilarious.
try to forget as soon as the game's over
It was
with.
hilarious.
So,
But so since we plugged that we were doing the show today, we had a parent contact us, right?
yeah. Well, let's
just say this.
Let's ask this question, and we'll
Yeah.
start with you, Coach Locke. Since all of your kids have learning differences, right? What's the biggest thing that you have to do with coaching these children that have learning differences?
are you talking about
Just in general.
just coaching them like
Yeah.
they want?
Coaching them and
I
then
think-
seeing them in the classroom as well.
I think knowing about a kid and getting a rapport with our kids, because if they don't trust you, they're either not going to be out there very much, or they're going to be so nervous that they can't do anything. So a lot of it is, I really try to joke around and kid around with our kids. I give them nicknames. I probably go overboard with some of them. I try to make some of the names appropriate for their parents to hear. But I think a lot of it is just putting the time and effort into it and just making them feel like they're a part of the program, no matter what their skill level is. They could be the best kid on the team or the worst kid on the team, and just making them feel like they're a part of a program. And in middle school, that's huge, because I think a lot of times if you lose a kid in middle school to athletics and they come into the program and they're not happy and you put them down, or they didn't feel like they were really a person that wanted to be on the field, you're not going to see them in high school. So really, I think middle school is a building block for what you see in high school. And I think that's an important part of it. People say, well, I've got buddies of mine that are at other schools, and they say, well, what is it like working with kids that are learning different? I said, it's basically like working with anybody that you're coaching. You're trying to teach them a certain skill. The difference is Shelton is where, and I use basketball as an example, on the basketball court, you may get out there and play somebody at Jesuit, and they're processing like that on a basketball court. At Shelton, they may be doing the same drills and skills, but they may be processing at a little bit slower pace. So some people, to the untrained eye, think, well, that kid's he's not as good as that kid. He may be just as good as that. He's just processing that information a little differently. Mm-hmm. And what's really rewarding is when you get that kid who may have struggled in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and you see them in high school and they're clicking along. To me, that's the best part of being at Shelton and being a coach.
Because you've seen that growth.
You see it, and you see it, firsthand,
Yeah.
and you feel a part of it. I mean,
Yeah.
when a kid goes from middle school into high school and they go to a D1 or a D2 school or somewhere and they're playing, you feel like you were part of the process instead of sending a kid in opposite direction.
Right. What about you, Coach Jordan?
I'll echo what, a lot of things Chuck just said. And one of the biggest things you figure out real quick as a coach, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And you've got to establish relationships. And if you've got a kid's best interest at heart, that's going to come through. And then once you develop that trust, that allows you to coach them. And that allows you to coach them hard. But at the same time, and we always had a rule that if you really got onto a kid during practice, you had to go up after practice and make sure you put your arm around him, you talk to him, and you explain to him that, hey, I wasn't mad at you. I was mad at what you were doing. but I wasn't mad at you. And it doesn't take away from you. I still care for you and I still love you, but that's not acceptable. And, just trying to help them out and to teach them in that way. And I think you do that, and then you've got a chance to help them learn how to be successful.
Excellent.
That's and you saying that, it brought back memories. And you're right. I remember this particular coach that I'm thinking of that yelled all the time. He would. Even though he was in your face, yelling, screaming, and I know you know who I'm talking about.
I know exactly what you're talking about, yep.
But afterwards, after practice, he'd come back and, hey, Yearout, come here. And he'd take you over and talk to you and just say, he'd tell you he cared about you and I really need you to do X, Y, Z, and you need to be paying attention to this or whatever. So there is that love. You see that coach really cares about you, right?
And then once you see that they care, you want to perform for that coach.
Every time.
And
every
that
time.
teacher, Have you guys had any students in the classroom? Do you guys, have you taught or what, I guess, what am I trying to say,
Well, you
Stephen?
were a math teacher, right?
Yes,
Oh,
yeah.
math teacher.
I taught math the first 13 years. Yeah, I was at Garland High.
Not only was he coach,
Math.
coach, he was my math teacher.
Oh, really?
So he got
Oh, boy.
he actually got to see. Will you put that other picture up? He actually got to see this quite often.
Oh, Stephen.
He got to see me sleeping in his class a lot, which then I had to run a lot once I got to school. Bear crawling,
Sprints?
running.
Oh, gosh. Burpees?
Williams Stadium had these metal bleachers, and we used to have to run zigzags up the bleacher, down the bleacher, up the
Yeah.
bleacher, down the bleacher, and then if we weren't tired enough, then we had to run 10-100s back and forth. We had a good regiment there. If anything, if nothing else, we could run.
That's, there
No
you
doubt.
go. That's,
So when you're out there on the field, or even as a teacher, even without knowing that child has a learning difference, how do you determine, or how is it pretty evident, I guess I should say, that child needs some extra attention or that child needs extra help? So, either one of y'all can jump in.
Sure. It's, that's one of the things as you go on, you figure out teaching and in coaching, you figure out real quickly, number one, all kids learn differently. Some are visual, some auditorially, some have to walk through and do it kinesthetically. It's everybody's a little bit different on how they learn. And that's what, because at the end of the day, your job as a teacher and as a coach is to make sure your students learn. And so you've got to figure out a way to help them and to make them successful. And that's one thing that has changed tremendously over the years was the amount of resources. And they're not where they need to be, but it is a lot better than it used to be.
Absolutely.
For sure.
cool.
What about you, Coach?
I just think a lot of times we see these kids and you'll be talking to them and you're working with them, and we kind of have the team mentality a lot of times, and we forget that these kids are individuals. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times if you want to lump them all together, of they may be the best team or the worst team or whatever, I really like to figure out, some kids you can sit there and yell as loud as you want to, and they'll be motivated and they'll go do whatever they want to. Other kids, if you yell at them, they'll shut down. They'll never talk to you again. And so you kind of have to know, what you're dealing with first. The positives at Shelton is that I know where these kids are in the classroom because I talk to their advisors or teachers, and
You know their plan.
I know their plan. I know where they've come from. I know which kids are having issues with their parents, if there's a divorce, if there's a death in the family. I had a kid this past year for 2 weeks. He had lost his dog. He was a completely different player. And I think a lot of it is just knowing where they're at, especially in middle school, because that's just such a strange time anyway.
Yeah.
I wouldn't go back to middle school to be
I
a
hated
student
middle school.
forever. I was grounded the entire time. But what I love about working with these kids is you can pull them over. I think the deal one-on-one, putting your arm around a kid saying, hey, listen, you're not the same player as that kid over there. And if you don't do what I ask you to do, I'm going to yell at you again tomorrow. And I did that with a kid that actually just graduated from Arkansas, and he wrote me a letter saying, thanks for yelling at me all those years and being on my case. He's my quarterback. He goes, because it helped me in college, because I didn't think anybody was going to yell at me in college like you did when I was in high school. And a lot of it, these kids don't mind you yelling if you're there to tell them, hey, this is what we're trying to get you to do. I can't whisper what I want you to do. So it's neat being at Shelton because I think knowing a kid's background is half of really what you need to know about as a coach.
I have to tell you, thinking back, well, especially at Garland High School, I thought there was cameras in the rooms or whatever because these coaches, they knew everything. Man. Well, I had it rough because my cousin was the art teacher there, and then Ms. Lowen kept tabs on me. So I mean, I could have just done whatever I did, and I walked through the, hey coach, and he's like, hey, I heard you did. I was like, how'd you? I just did it. What are you talking about? So yeah, I mean that. They definitely kept really close tabs on us as a football team. And by the time we got to the field house, if we hadn't had our homework done or whatever, they were like, get in there and get it done. It was our coaches definitely stressed the education piece of it before sports, and that's I think it's huge because there are a lot of coaches out there that are win at all cost. And they don't push the education as much. They want to win those games. So I'm really happy that I've had those type of coaches, that my kids now have those type of coaches also. So
what would you say to any coaches out there about working and coaching and teaching kids with learning differences or disabilities? You have any guidance, or new coaches, new teachers?
I think it would go kind of a lot of what we've said. Take time to get to know the kid, figure out what makes them tick, figure out how they can learn, how they process things, how they think about things, and then work with them to find out a way to make them successful. And it's amazing, especially kids with learning difficulties. If they can have a little bit of success, it just feeds and it just goes on and on, and it just explodes from there. But you've got to take the time to get to know them. You've got to take the time to find out from a kid who he's happy-go-lucky all the time, and then all of a sudden he just goes into a shell. And your first reaction is want to get upset with them, but over the years you realize that, okay, Johnny, what's going on? What's happening? What's the deal? Talk to me, tell me what's going on so we can help. And just for kids just to be able to talk and let that stuff out can make such a big difference in them in their lives.
Yeah. Well, and then they know someone's listening too and care.
Yes.
Right?
well, it's that father figure, right?
Yes.
So that's the other piece of it that a lot of people don't. Classroom teachers don't get a lot of times, right? Because you're in and out. You're in and out of that classroom, and the teacher's like, "Oh, where's my homework?" Whatever. But the coaches get that extra touch to those kids, and that being the father figure also a lot of times.
And with that physical activity, and there's a lot happening out on a field and in a weight room and whatever you guys do, but
all that football stuff. So, do you have any advice for parents? So what I'm talking about is, little Johnny has a learning difference, and the parent is trying to make sure that the child gets everything that they need to be successful. Do you have any advice for the parents as far as coaching goes? How to deal with coaches that their kids are playing for?
Well, and maybe that coach doesn't understand the learning the learning disability. Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
How much time do we have?
Well, I mean, just your top three.
Main thing is don't make excuses for your children. Don't let a learning difference be the excuse that you use for them to get out of working hard. We tell our kids, whether they're learning different or not, the hardest working kids are going to be successful.
Right.
And they're going to be successful athletes. And if you take shortcuts and try to get a kid out, or, hey, he can't do this, so we're not going to push him into this or whatever, and we're going to let him sit on the couch and play games the whole time. I think that's a terrible way for parents. Another one is to be realistic about your child. If your child struggles in the classroom, that's probably going to be a struggle on the athletic field, especially in a lot of ways. Now, some kids are different on that, but a lot of parents come into the program basically, well, my kid's learning different and they really struggle. academically, but we want them to be the top athlete in the group, and that's a rarity. So they have to be realistic with what their kids' skills are, and I think they also just need to love them. It doesn't matter how many layups they miss or how many passes they drop. Give them opportunities, let them get out there and do as much as they can, and let them have fun with it, because especially at our level, if you don't make it fun, you're not going to see them again. And fun can be, I mean, as we say in football, we want it to be fun and fundamentals, and we work on that every day. But I think parents need to be realistic about what they're getting, and they need to understand that let the kid rise to his interest. Now, if his interest is sitting on the couch all day long, you might have a problem. But I think give them a lot of opportunities, and then just support them, and don't, a lot of parents the parents are going to be around the kid longer than the coaches, as far as the rides home and stuff like that, and just understand. I've had dads in the past that wanted to berate and tell every one of their, every mistake the kid made in the game. The kid ended up, he didn't want to be a part of that, so he quit by high school.
Right.
So I just think being supportive is number one thing.
That you just saying that takes me back to Breakfast Club for some reason. There's that one kid in Breakfast Club. His dad's always like,
yeah.
"Is he wrestler? I can't remember." And the dad is always like, and then anyway. Sorry.
What about you?
What about you, Coach?
I don't have really much to add to that. I mean, you hit the nail right on the head. I mean, it's, and make kids responsible for their actions, take responsibility for what they do. And, no matter what your situation, because you can, it's the same thing every coach you always hear say, you can control two things every day, and that's your attitude and your effort, no matter what.
Yeah.
So if you do that, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
I guess the only thing I would add to that is let the kid play. This is a game. At the end of the day, it's a game. They're supposed to enjoy it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Allow them to make mistakes. They're gonna make mistakes.
Yeah.
It's okay. That's part of growth.
They're not professionals yet.
So
And majority of them may never be a professional athlete, correct?
Right.
What's the percentage on that? Do you know?
I think it's less than 1%, isn't it?
Less than 2% of NCAA Division I football players make it to the NFL. And then when you get into high school, you're less than 1%.
Yeah, so have fun,
Yeah,
right?
the odds are you're not going to make a living playing
Yeah.
football or basketball or
Yeah.
any of that. And so you need to enjoy it.
Have fun. It's high school or middle school.
Yep.
Have
Exactly.
fun and do good in school and study hard
Be nice to your mom.
and be nice to your mom. That's right.
something I tell my boys all the time. My middle son always talks about how he wants to be an NBA player. He has his mother's height, so not that you can't play NBA basketball and be vertically challenged.
Doc Rivers did it.
Yeah, well, Spud
Right?
Webb.
Or was it Spud?
Spud Webb. He was.
Who's Doc
Yeah.
Rivers? That's a football
He was
or
short.
basketball.
He's a basketball
Yeah,
player.
yeah.
He's
So,
Okay.
I
I get it confused.
I always stress with them, hey, look, you're one play away from never playing sports again. So always make sure that you have the education first,
Right.
and the rest of it can fall in place.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
All right.
well, that's about all the time we have for today's show. Thank you so much, Coach Jordan, Coach Locke, for coming on
Yeah.
and sharing your insight on coaching. I think it's really important for us as parents to hear, as other coaches to hear, especially the newer coaches that may not understand how to work with these kids that have the learning differences, because it is so important for them to understand it. Please be sure to like us on Facebook and subscribe to us on YouTube. Help us
Yes.
get to that 1,000 subscriber goal. That helps us with our sponsors.
Yes. And so we can continue to do the show because it's not cheap. Anyways, we always like to recommend go get your son, daughter fully evaluated. Knowing is half the battle, and knowing what is going on with your child is helpful. So you can
They'll-
create a plan that will work for your child to succeed.
Yeah, once your child understands what the issue is that they may not be able to verbalize, that stress is lifted off of them. That stress is lifted off of you as a parent also.
Right.
So,
Because
like you
then
said,
you're like, okay, this is what we're dealing
yeah,
with.
now we can move forward.
Now we can try to help. And
We have some templates on our website for evaluations that you can just fill out. It's kind of a copy or
cut and paste.
paste
Yeah.
that you can
Fill in the blank.
send straight to your school district. So if you need that, you can go to our website, www.empowerdyslexia.info.
Yeah. And join us again next week.
See you there.